Okay, this week for our classic interview, we're going to go back to when I spoke to Alec Karakatsanis about the bail bonds industry, which is a horrible, horrible industry, which I've covered before. And this is sort of in the context of the story we've covered a couple of times now with Shane Kavanaugh from Portland, Oregon, about Saudi nationals, typically students, who are charged with crimes in the United States and end up being whisked back to Saudi Arabia, evading justice, and the contrast between those wealthy Saudis and what is effectively a kid gloves treatment by virtue of the Saudi authorities' involvement, compared to how the average person, and particularly poor and lower middle class people, how they are treated, including by the bail bonds industry. So back to my interview from February of 2016 with Alec Karakatsanis. Take a look at this. I'm joined today by Alec Karakatsanis, who's a civil rights lawyer dedicated to transforming the American criminal injustice system. Alec, we've been talking about bail and the bail bond system in the United States for a very long time. Let's sort of start at the most fundamental level. When someone is brought into court, what is the basis on which the amount of bail is decided, and whether there is even bail at all?
So after someone's arrested in all 50 states, they're brought to jail, and in most circumstances, they're told you're eligible for release immediately, but you have to give us some money first. And in some places, that decision is based on a chart that is based purely on the offense that the person has been charged with. And in other places, they go for some officer, some magistrate, some judge, and the judge just sort of picks a number or an amount of money. And typically that's happening without any inquiry at all into whether the person can afford that amount of money. That's interestingly not the case in the District of Columbia, where I live and practice, or in any of the federal courts in any of the 50 states around the country. In those systems, people are released prior to trial without having to pay any money, unless the government that they're a danger to the community or risk of flight. And so in the federal system and in DC, decisions about whether a human being is kept in a cage prior to trial are made based on evidence and about whether they're a danger rather than based on someone's poverty. But in all of the other states, whether you stay in jail after you're arrested by the police depends solely on whether you can afford to pay bail.
And now explain how the bail bond system works. As you mentioned, your ability to pay that bail may vary drastically, and it often does. So talk about what service a bail bondsman provides to someone who has been set a bail realistically that they cannot afford.
So in 46 states, we have what's called the commercial bail bond industry. There are 4 states that have outlawed bail bondsmen. The United States and the Philippines are the only 2 countries in the world that still allow commercial bail bondsmen. What this industry does is it preys upon the people that are too poor to afford to pay the bail that's been set by the court. They come in and they say, if you give us a percentage of that amount, we will tell the court that we'll cover the rest. Now, they typically, because they control so many state legislatures and local government systems, they've typically passed rules that actually protect them even from having to pay at all, even if you don't show up. They're risking virtually nothing. What they then do is they trap these people in these incredibly onerous exploitative contracts. So sometimes they might say, you give us 5% of the money bail, and then you agree to pay us the rest at the highest allowable interest rate under law for years. So you could be like some of our clients, you could be arrested by the police, and then you could be held in jail on a bond you can't afford. And then you go to a bail bondsman, you make a payment, and now you owe them money for years. And the very next day, the prosecutor looks at your case and says, there's no crime here, or there's not enough evidence, and they dismiss the case. Now you're stuck owing money to the bail bondsman for a case that was never prosecuted. And this is the way in which the bail bond industry transfers billions of dollars every year from the poorest people in our society, those people that are accused of crimes and their families who can't afford bail, to some of the richest people in the country, the bail bond industry and the insurance companies that underwrite them.
One of the incredible circumstances of this industry is that, on the one hand, the bail bonds industry sometimes likes to defend itself by saying, listen, if you're sitting there in pretrial detention, it's going to be tougher for you to build the strongest case possible to defend yourself when your court date ultimately comes. At the same time, though, Alec, that same industry is lobbying all the time to put more alleged crimes under the list qualifying for pre-trial detention unless you are able to pay bail. They're sort of creating a bigger and bigger market for themselves, aren't they?
They are. There are about 500,000 human beings on any given night in this country who are in a jail cell because they cannot afford to pay bail. That's the way the bail industry likes it. They want as many people as possible as potential customers. So they're constantly lobbying state and local governments for more. Another incredible thing that they do is they lobby state and local governments for other policies that subtly help them. So, for example, in the state of Louisiana, if I'm arrested and brought to court for a bail hearing, the public defender that represents me, the prosecutor that's arguing against me, the sheriff that brought me there, and the judge that is making a decision about my bail all take by statute a percentage cut of the money bail that's set in my case. And that statute was put into place by the bail bond industry to give everyone in the system an incentive to keep that bail bond industry thriving. And that's the kind of perverse incentives that we're seeing all over the country with the bail bond industry.
Now,
And what's really
oh, I'm
interesting.
sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say what's really interesting about the point you just made is the bail bond industry likes to advertise itself as helping to release people. And yet, in our lawsuits, after we've seen them filed, we see a lot of fear mongering by the bail bond industry about how, well, if you get rid of the bail bond industry, you're going to be releasing all these criminals, which is the very advertising slogan that they've been going by for years. What's fascinating about it, and the reason why a lot of police and prosecutors and sheriffs are really opposed to the bail industry, is that if you believe that a person is a danger to the community, and you think that person could harm other people while they're awaiting trial, why in the world would you release that person just because they have money? If someone is a dangerous predator, I would argue they're even more dangerous if they have resources and money. So the bail bond industry is advocating for a system that releases Robert Durst, but that cages Sandra Bland. And that is absolutely absurd.
Do you have data nationally on what percentage of alleged perpetrators are not even offered bail? In other words, they are considered such a risk to society that bail is not even an option. And then how many are offered bail but ultimately never pay it, either directly or via bail bondsman? And how many do pay the bail and get out? Do we have some sort of sense of those numbers?
No, and in fact, no one's keeping those numbers precisely because of the incentives involved here. The bail bond industry doesn't want there to be decisions made about people's dangerousness. They want people to be offered high money bonds on the chance they could get the money together to pay it. So when courts all around the country in most states aren't ever making the determination that someone is dangerous, they're just estimating if a judge thinks that a person is dangerous in a state that uses a lot of commercial money bail, they'll just estimate an amount of money that they think the person can't afford. So they'll say, $1 million on the hope that the person can't pay it. That's very unconstitutional, obviously, but that's what's happening in courts all over the country. And so no one is keeping any kind of data right now on the question that you asked, which is sort of what's happening to people that are really dangerous, and are they being released on bail because they're rich, and things like that. So we don't really know. All we know is that the money bail system is keeping hundreds of thousands of very low risk, nonviolent, and otherwise and offenders that we know through the data aren't likely to commit new offenses while they're pending trial in jail just because they're poor.
I want to go back to something you sort of alluded to, which is the sort of general lack of risk that bail bondsmen have for losing money. They claim, right, that they deserve to earn this sort of commission, typically 10%, for helping people get out of pretrial detention because they are taking on risk, right? If the alleged perpetrator disappears after they've been bailed out by the bail bondsman is on the hook for their entire bail. The reality, though, is that these bail bondsmen individually have insurance, and that if you look at the numbers, it is very rare that they actually are out anything close to 100% of the bail for any individual alleged perpetrator. They have a very solid insurance system in place.
It's very true. All of those empirical claims of the bond industry are complete fabrications. The other really interesting point is what they've negotiated for in a lot of states and a lot of jurisdictions is a grace period. So they don't have to, even if the person does skip out, they don't have to make that payment for 2, 3, 4 years, right? And so what you see then is they rely on the police. It's very, very common in our society that the police will then pick somebody up on a warrant because we've got the U.S. Marshals and local police and sheriffs who are out looking for people if they ever skip court. And when those people are then brought back in by the police, not by the bail industry doesn't have to pay. So they sort of free ride on law enforcement to assure themselves of never having to put any risk up. And as you say, even on the very, very, very small number of cases where they are exposed because the person skipped court, they have insurance to protect themselves from that. And it's actually those insurance companies, not individual bail bonds people, but those insurance companies that are providing a lot of the lobbying and the money and the financial support for a lot of these terrible policies. And I think
It's yet another example. It's yet another example where there's sort of capitalism for the profits while you socialize the risk.
That's exactly right. And what's really encouraging now is you're seeing law enforcement leaders all over the country, the Department of Justice, federal prosecutors, local sheriffs, national associations of police officers who are speaking out against this because the system makes absolutely no sense. It does not make sense to release people who might be dangerous just because they're rich. It does not make sense to hold people in a cage who might not risk at all just because they're poor.
We've been speaking with Alec Karakatsanis, civil rights lawyer. Thanks so much for talking to us about this really important issue.
Thanks for having me.